Howdy there, friends and faithful listeners. Welcome to the Bible Explained on this lovely Monday morning. Grab your cup of coffee or your cup of tea because we're going to finish up talking about King Solomon and his reign and how he falls away at the end of his life right before his death. So faithful listeners, don't forget that Advent starts on Sunday. So if you haven't gotten your Advent devotional for teenage girls yet, you definitely should. You know, if you have any teenage girl in your life right now, you should check out the Adore Teen Girl's Guide to Advent, which I wrote myself, and it is available on Amazon. So just click the link that says books, and you'll be able to get it before Advent if you order today or within the next few days. And make sure you give it to a teen girl that you know. Before today, let's go ahead and read 2 Chronicles 9. 13 through 31. I don't even know where we are today. So let's go ahead and read this. As usual, I'll be reading from the WEB version of the Bible, but please feel free to grab your version of scripture, whatever that may be. And also go ahead and grab your cup of coffee or your cup of tea this morning for you crazy tea drinkers. And let's enjoy reading God's word together as we learn about the life and death of Solomon. Now the weight of the gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold, in addition to that which the traders and merchants brought. All the kings of Arabia and the governors of the country brought gold and silver to Solomon. King Solomon made 200 large shields of beaten gold. 600 shekels of beaten gold went into one large shield. He made 300 shields of beaten gold. 300 shekels of gold went into one shield. The king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with pure gold. There were 6 steps to the throne, with a footstool of gold, which were fastened to the throne, and armrests on either side by the place of the seat, and 2 lions standing beside the armrests. 12 lions stood there on one side and on the other on the 6 steps. There was nothing like it made in any other kingdom. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. Silver was not considered valuable in the days of Solomon, for the king had ships that went to Tarshish with Hiram's servants. Once every 3 years, the ships of Tarshish came bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. So King Solomon exceeded all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. All the kings of the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. They each brought tribute, vessels of silver, vessels of gold, clothing, armor, spices, horses, and mules every year. Solomon had 4,000 stalls for horses and chariots, and 12,000 horsemen that he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king at Jerusalem. He ruled over all the kings from the river even to the land of the Philistines and to the border of Egypt. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and he made cedars to be as abundant as the sycamore trees that are in the lowland. They brought horses for Solomon out of Egypt and out of all lands. Now the rest of the acts of Solomon, first and last, aren't they written in the history of Nathan the prophet, and in the prophecy of Ahijah the Shilonite, and in the visions of Iddo the seer, concerning Jeroboam the son of Nebat? Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel 40 years. Solomon slept with his fathers, and he was buried in his father David's city, and Rehoboam his son reigned in his place. So this portion talks about the end of King Solomon's reign. It says in verse 13 that the weight of the gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. So this would have been all of the tribute gold that kings from around the world actually paid to Solomon. This actually shows that King Solomon was extremely powerful, that all of these kings and all of these nations were actually sending that amount of gold to King Solomon in a year, because 666 talents of gold would be about 20 metric tons every single year. That amount of gold coming in is just preposterous, in my opinion, but that is how powerful King Solomon actually was. Now, I also should mention here, it says 666 talents. When you hear the word 666, you usually think of the Antichrist, right? But this right here is proof that not everything labeled 666 is necessarily the Antichrist. Just to throw that out there, because it's pretty clear that Solomon was not the Antichrist. Now, he might have done some things that were against God, But he was definitely not the Antichrist. But a lot of people have some superstition around that number. I actually had this one woman years ago when I was a hairdresser. She was a client who would come in for the $10 haircuts that we would offer. And so she handed me the coupon, which said $9.99 for the haircut. And I was just kind of joking around with her. And I was like, you handed it to me upside down. So it looks like this haircut is going to be $6.66. And she like freaked out. She's like, I never say that number. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, it was just a joke, lady. Like, I was not trying to cast a spell on you or anything, I promise. But there's a lot of superstition around the number. But we should watch out, like if we see some guy gaining power and, I don't know, somehow the number 666 comes up while this guy is gaining power, maybe we should watch out for that. But generally, the number 666 is just a number, as it is right here in 2 Chronicles. So in addition to all of that gold King Solomon receives, he also received gold from the traders and merchants. So Solomon, as we know, did a lot of business. He traded with a lot of different nations, a lot of different people. And so in addition to what the king's tribute would be, the merchants brought in even more gold to Solomon. So Solomon was an extremely wealthy man. And Solomon actually writes about this in Ecclesiastes 2. When he's discussing all of the things he did in his life, he says, I hoarded great sums of silver and gold. Solomon was an extremely rich king. And with all of this gold that was brought to King Solomon, it says in verse 15 that Solomon made 200 large shields of beaten gold. 600 shekels of beaten gold went into one large shield. And he also made smaller buckler type shields as well. And 300 shekels of gold went into those tinier shields. And it says he put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. So the house of the forest of Lebanon is talked about more in 1 Kings than it is in 2 Chronicles. Essentially, the house of the forest of Lebanon was this big, beautiful ballroom that had so many cedars in it that they ended up naming it the Forest of Lebanon because of all of the cedar beams in this giant room. And so Solomon put all of the shields that he made in that room, which makes a lot of people speculate if the Forest of Lebanon wasn't an armory of some sort. Though there is some debate as to whether it was an armory or if it was just attached to Solomon's house, and the shields were probably more of a decoration than used for actual battle because, as you know, gold is a little bit soft. So it's very likely that the shields were more for decorative purposes than for actual combat. But on top of that, he also, in verse 17, made this great throne of ivory and overlaid it with pure gold. Now, my guess is not that this throne was made of pure ivory overlaid with gold, though it could have been. My guess is that it was made of wood overlaid with gold and then had ivory filigree or something, because other things that have been found from this time period kind of followed that similar fashion, where something was wooden overlaid with gold and then had this filigree of ivory in it. Solomon made a giant throne for himself, and this throne was beautiful. It was amazing. There was nothing else like it ever in the entire world, is what it says. This throne had 6 steps going up to it. It had a footstool of gold, which was fastened to the throne, and armrests on either side by the place of the seat, 2 lions standing beside the armrests. 12 lions stood there on the one side and on the other on the 6 steps. So if you're thinking of this throne, going up to it, you had to walk up these steps, and on either side of the steps were these cast golden lions that probably represented the 12 tribes of Israel. And so you'd walk up these golden steps past these golden lions, and then you'd get to the throne, which was gigantic. It had this beautiful footrest that was attached to the throne. And then on either side of the throne were 2 larger golden lions. And it had inlays of ivory as well. Nothing else was like this throne. That's what it says in verse 19. There was nothing like it made in any other kingdom. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were made of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. Silver was not considered valuable in the days of Solomon, for the king had ships that went to Tarshish with Huram's servants. Once every 3 years, the ships of Tarshish came back bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. So don't forget, Israel had become a seafaring nation under King Solomon. And so they were trading with all sorts of different nations. They were going everywhere. They came back from Tarshish every 3 years with extremely valuable things for King Solomon and for Israel, just things that weren't in Israel. For example, peacocks are not native to Israel, and neither are apes. So Solomon made Israel extremely wealthy. If you jump down to verse 27, the king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and he made cedars to be as abundant as the sycamore trees that are in the lowland. So silver wasn't even considered valuable in the days of Solomon. If you had a big chunk of silver, it would have been worth almost nothing because of how common silver actually was. So it says in verse 22, King Solomon exceeded all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. And that is exactly what God said Solomon would do. All the kings of the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. They each brought tribute, vessels of silver, vessels of gold, clothing, armor, spices, horses, and mules every year. Solomon had 4,000 stalls for horses and chariots and 12,000 horsemen that he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king at Jerusalem. So we talked the other day about these storage cities that Solomon built. And essentially, it was like a garage, like an average person's garage where you just throw all your stuff that you don't know what to do with in your garage. That was these cities for Solomon. He had so much stuff that he actually made storage cities that people would live in to take care of all of the excess that Solomon had. One of these cities was specifically for horses, is what it says. And this city had 4,000 stalls for all of these horses and chariots, not to mention there was a place for the horsemen as well. It says that 12,000 horsemen were stationed in the chariot cities and with the king at Jerusalem. He ruled over all the kings from the river, even to the land of the Philistines and to the border of Egypt. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones. He made cedars to be as abundant as the sycamore trees that are in the lowland. They brought horses for Solomon out of Egypt and out of all lands. So Solomon was an extremely impressive king. People from all over the world wanted to give him gifts. He was insanely wealthy. He had these storage cities for horses and horsemen and chariots and everything else. He made beautiful things. He also hosted these TED Talks where people would come and listen to the wisdom of Solomon. And he wouldn't just talk about spiritual things. He also talked about, farming and fishing and just practical day-to-day things that people could learn more about. He was extremely knowledgeable, very studied. And he talks about all of this in his memoir, which is Ecclesiastes. He discusses how much wisdom he actually gained for himself and how in the end, it was all worthless to him because Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes at the end of his life. He kind of seems very, very depressed, quite honestly, in the book of Ecclesiastes. It's a really fantastic book. In fact, I'm going through it myself right now, and it's just been really cool to read Ecclesiastes alongside studying the life of Solomon for the podcast. It really opens up a lot about Solomon's life. So I highly recommend, if you're interested in Solomon, going and reading the book of Ecclesiastes. It's really eye-opening. But then 2 Chronicles 9 ends with Solomon's death. Jumping down to verse 30, it says, Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel for 40 years. Solomon slept with his fathers, and he was buried in his father David's city. And Rehoboam, his son, reigned in his place. Now, if you only read 2 Chronicles without reading 1 Kings, you might be like, oh, Solomon was a fantastic king to the very last days. He did pretty much nothing wrong, only built Israel up, even seemed like a spiritually great king. But if you read 1 Kings 11, it talks about a different story at the end of Solomon's life that 2 Chronicles does not talk about. And probably the reason 2 Chronicles doesn't talk about it is because 2 2 Chronicles focused on the temple specifically, because the author of 2 Chronicles was likely Ezra, who would have been the high priest of Israel after the Israelite nation came back from the Babylonian captivity. So Ezra just had a different goal when he was talking about Solomon's life. But let's turn to 1 Kings 11 and read about some of the bad things that Solomon did at the end of his life. Now, King Solomon loved many foreign women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and the Hittites, of the nations concerning which Yahweh said to the children of Israel, "You shall not go among them, neither shall they come among you, for surely they will turn your heart after their gods." Solomon joined to these in love. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. His wives turned his heart away. When Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with Yahweh his God, as the heart of David his father was. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Solomon did that which was evil in Yahweh's sight, and didn't go fully after Yahweh as David his father did. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the mountain that is before Jerusalem, and for Moloch, the abomination of the children of Ammon. So he did for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. Yahweh was angry with Solomon because his heart was turned away from Yahweh, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods. But he didn't keep that which Yahweh commanded. Therefore Yahweh said to Solomon, "Because this is done by you, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and give it to your servant. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days, for David your father's sake, but I will tear it out of your son's hand. However, I will not tear away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son, for David my servant's sake, and for Jerusalem's sake, which I have chosen." So that shows a very different story as to what happened at the end of Solomon's life. Solomon had so many wives that it said he actually loved them. I don't know how you can love that many people at one time, but he had 700 wives and then 300 concubines. And of these 1,000 women that he married, they started turning his heart away after all of their foreign gods, because they came from Moab and Ammon and Edom, and they worshipped these terrible gods like Chemosh and Moloch. Those idols were ones that people would burn their children to. Those were child sacrifice idols. And Solomon set up pillars for them, is what it says, and altars to them. And he actually went with his wives and started burning incense to these gods and goddesses. He also followed after the Ashtoreth as well, which was one of the main gods that Israel always fell prey to, was the Ashtoreth cult, because it was a sex cult. And you can see that Solomon certainly has his problems when it comes to sex, right? Because of the amount of women that he married. And here's the thing about leaders. They control a lot. They kind of set the stage for everybody else. And so Solomon setting up these altars and these idols and these pillars to these different gods, that's showing the people of Israel, hey, it's okay to do this. It's okay to go and burn incense to these gods. It's okay to worship them along with worshiping Yahweh. Because probably Solomon didn't ever stop his religiosity when it came to going to the temple either. It did say in 2 Chronicles that Solomon was quite religious with that. Every single morning he would burn a sacrifice to God and go to the temple. But he was doing that along with worshiping these other idols. And God became angry with him and said, "You know what, Solomon, I appeared to you twice. I warned you twice. Do not follow after these other gods. Be like David, your father." But you didn't do it. And so now I'm going to rip the kingdom away from your son and give it to somebody else. Not the entire kingdom. Your son will still have control of one tribe, but the rest of the tribes of Israel, are going to go to another man who is going to be one of your servants. You know what? I think Solomon's life really shows that no matter how wise you are, you can still fall into sin. You know, if Solomon, who is like the wisest guy on the planet, could turn away from Yahweh, then certainly each one of us could do the same exact thing. So we need to be very careful, you know. I mean, Solomon's life is truly a warning to all of us, I think. And like I said, read the book of Ecclesiastes because it is so eye-opening as to what Solomon was thinking, how even his wisdom still caused him to sin and fall astray, because that's essentially what the book of Ecclesiastes is all about. But faithful listeners, I hope you enjoyed today's episode and finishing up 2 Chronicles 9 and the life of Solomon. We're going to now get into the other lesser-known kings of 2 Chronicles, which I always enjoy talking about because it's history and it's just fun to discuss. So I hope to see all of you guys on Wednesday for another episode from 2 Chronicles, where we will talk about the reign of Jeroboam and how it starts out quite rocky. We'll get into that. But also tune in tomorrow for an episode from 1 Timothy on the New Testament side of stuff, because don't forget, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm in the New Testament, and Mondays and Wednesdays, I'm in the Old Testament. So I hope to see all of you guys tomorrow for a great episode as well. Happy listening, and God bless.